Hello and welcome to this weekend edition of the Daily Dose of Greek. And today we're going to draw some insights from Con Campbell's wonderful book, Advances in the Study of Greek, specifically at some statistics he has on the historical present, or what is sometimes called the narrative present. So let's just look here at John 2:5 from the Gospel of John. It says, Lege he meter autou. If we do that very literally, it would be his mother says. But of course, virtually every English translation will translate lege, that present tense verb, in the past in English as said, his mother said, because it's historical narrative, and they're aorist verbs, past tense verbs all around. So we understand it must be reporting something in the past. So the question is, why is it in the present? It's undeniable there are a lot of these in the New Testament, and why are they there? Is there any pattern at all? Well, I thought that Dr. Campbell had some really nice statistics in this book in just one section. The book has all different kinds of things. It deals with voice, it deals with lexicons, chapters on all different kinds of stuff, pronouncing Greek. But let's just look at his statistics regarding the use of the historical present in the Gospels. Okay, so first off, the Gospel of Matthew, right? There are 89 historical presents in the Gospel of Matthew, and that is 12% of the 753 present indicatives in the Gospel of Matthew. Just let that soak in for a second. Say, okay, basically almost like 1 out of every 10 present indicatives in the Gospel of Matthew is a historical present. Okay, the other ones would be found in direct discourse and things like that. Remember, these are indicatives. We're not dealing with participles or infinitives, anything like that. Of those 89 historical presents, 70 of them are used in discourse. So they're used to introduce, rather. They're used to introduce direct discourse or reported discourse. This person says, just like we saw in the example from John. And then 17 of them are used for verbs of propulsion. And this is terminology that Dr. Con Campbell uses. I'm not, when I think propulsion, I think like coming, going, but then he goes on to include words of giving and receiving. That seems to me that really broadens out the idea of propulsion very widely. But it's undeniable that a lot of the historical or narrative presents, these present tense verbs used in historical narrative, are used for verbs of motion. And I'm not completely sure on his rationale for including verbs of giving and receiving as well. But if you add those up, 70 plus 17, may not be the best at math, but I know 70 plus 17 is 87. So that only leaves 2, if you look at all the historical presents in the Gospel of Matthew, all but 2 of them are verbs of propulsion, are verbs used to introduce discourse. That's striking if you think about it. In the Gospel of Mark, we find 151 historical presents. It's a larger percentage, just almost 1 out of every 3 present indicatives in Mark. 29% of the 514 present indicatives in Mark are historical presents. Then let's see how those divide up. 90 of them introduce discourse, so are used to introduce speech. Lege says, or something like that, just like we saw at the beginning. 61, Con Campbell classifies as verbs of propulsion. So again, we may not be that great at math, but we can say 90 plus 61, that's under 51. So 100% of the historical narratives in Mark are classified either as verbs that introduce discourse, introduce speech, or are verbs of propulsion. Notice this comment that Dr. Campbell also makes. He says, Mark tends to use historical presence in paragraph initial positions. That's significant. So, and he's also noting something we might call idiolect, like this is a Markan style. It's a way that the historical present is used by some other authors as well, but in contrast to, say, Luke, who does not use it in this way. Mark seems to use the historical or narrative present at the beginning of new sections to introduce new characters and for scene changes. So that's not only then have we figured out that all of Mark's historical presents either introduce speech or verbs of propulsion, but they also occur in these paragraph initial positions. Now let's take a look at the Gospel of Luke. Striking difference. Only 12 historical presents. So remember the word idiolect, right? Style. This is a very distinct from Markan and Lucan style. So only 1.9% of his 623 present indicatives are historical presents. 11 of them to introduce discourse. One of them is a verb of propulsion. He also makes the comment, Luke does not appear to use these historical presents in paragraph initial positions or to introduce new characters or scenes. So he doesn't have that sort of chunking or segmenting of the text that Mark does with the historical or narrative present. John, the Gospel of John, again in marked contrast to Luke, who has such a small number. John has 167 historical presents. That's 16% of his 1,027 present indicatives. 144 of those introduce speech. 23 of them are verbs of propulsion. And again, we may not be very good at math, but when we add those up, we end up with 167. So whether it introduces direct speech or whether it introduces a verb of motion or propulsion, whether it's a verb of motion or propulsion, that covers 100% of the historical presence in the Gospel of John. We're beginning to see a real pattern here. It's interesting as well, Con Campbell gives us some statistics on Thucydides. Now, Thucydides was writing as a Greek historian, wrote back in the more classical period or the period of dialects, so he's not even in the Koine period. His famous work, The History of the Peloponnesian War, Con Campbell doesn't look at all of that. He looks at a sample of 41 chapters, and within those 41 chapters, he says there are 39 historical presents, which is 46% of the 84 present indicatives in Thucydides. Sometimes people will say that the historical present is a sign of a poor writer. Well, this evidence would seem to contradict that. If we have Thucydides, a very respected historian, who uses the historical present even back in the classical period with this frequency, it would seem that it's more of an issue of style, personal style, or idiolect than it is something of one's intelligence or one's in other words, just using the historical present is not the sign of a lower quality work as opposed to a high quality work. Of those 39 historical presents, 11 of them introduce discourse. 28 of them are verbs of propulsion. Again, we may not be very good at math, but we could add those up, and that's 39. So 100% of them can be classified as either a verb of propulsion or to introduce speech. He does note as well that 4 of them are found in pericope initial positions, in other words, transitional at the beginning of a paragraph. So when you run into the historical present from now on, think about, is this introducing direct speech? Is it a verb of propulsion? Is this being used possibly to help signify the beginning of a new section?